Alrighty guys, so it has been over 4 years since the original Canon EOS R5 came out back in 2020, and if you guys remember, I did get my hands on the camera back in day one in 2020, and it was a huge game changer for my channel. It was the first camera that I had that was full frame 4K, had 10x422, had capabilities to shoot up to 12-bit RAW, 8K, which is just absolutely insane, and it was really one of the first cameras that changed the mirrorless line of cameras in the industry ever since 2020, because cameras following afterwards like the Sony A7S3 and many other mirrorless cameras finally started shooting 10-bit within a mirrorless body. So pretty much it was a huge game changer for cameras back then in 2020. However, with the Canon EOS R5, it was heavily marketed as a video first hybrid with also taking great photos as well, but the biggest issue with the R5 was the overheating issue, the fact that you couldn't really record too much with 8K or even 4K 120. It did have a record limit at 30 minutes, which meant that you needed to get an external recorder in order to record more, and also the dynamic range wasn't that great, and you're really just getting only C-Log and C-Log 3. And especially when I had my hands on the Canon R5 back in 2020, it was just something that I completely loved because it was way better than any other camera that I've ever owned in my life. However, there was a lot of small nitty-gritty details that just kind of made it not usable in a lot of video settings that I had it for, especially when I was on production shoots. Later came in 2022 to the Canon EOS R5C. Now the R5C by far has been one of my favorite cameras that I've ever owned, and I've used it pretty much almost every day within my productions, and the fact that you are getting no record limit, you can actually shoot 12-bit 8K RAW, you can do 4K 120 without any overheating or any issues, was just a huge advantage. But the only downside really to the Canon EOS R5C was that you weren't getting things like C-Log 2 for better dynamic range, and also the battery life using the LPE6NH batteries just weren't that great, mainly just because you are working with a cinema operating system, which consumes a lot more power compared to the photo operating system, since the R5C does have two operating systems built into one body, which made it the ultimate hybrid camera. But of course, because it has two operating systems, was a huge downside to its battery life. And now flash forward another 2 years, this year in 2024, with the announcement and release of the Canon EOS R5 Mark II. Now personally, in my opinion, when I saw the release of the Canon EOS R5 Mark II and the details that we are getting within the camera itself, I feel like the R5 Mark II is the true R5 that a lot of us wanted back in 2020, but now it is finally improved with no record limit. The overheating has been finally solved since it does have a good cooling system built into the camera, and we are getting some really good dynamic range and the addition of C-Log 2, which is a huge deal, especially for us video shooters, and it's one of the big reasons as to why I was interested in picking up the Canon R5 Mark II for a review and really see if it's going to be a beast in my arsenal or if it's just another piece of gear that is just a subtle upgrade from the Canon EOS R5. So let's get into the unboxing. Alrighty guys, so now we're officially in the new studio room. As you guys can tell, we got some new furniture, we got some new looks, we got some lights in the back. So let me know what you guys think about this setup. But right on my shoulder, we do have our package right here, which we're ready to unbox. So let's take out the Canon EOS R5 Mark II. So here it is. We finally have the Canon EOS R5 Mark II. As you guys can see around the box, we do have the logo, we do have the camera, and it's obviously very similarly packaged to the mirrorless line of cameras. This is not packaged like the Canon EOS R5C because that is in the cinema line of cameras, and we are going to be getting a cinema camera very soon, but more details on that later. But for now, we do have our hands on the R5 Mark II. So here we do have our LPE6 charger, and right here we do have the new Canon LPE6 battery. Now this battery is very important for the R5 Mark II, mainly just because if you want to use this camera for 4K 120, 8K video, and pretty much most of the video specs, you definitely want to use the newer batteries since the older ones aren't going to work as well. And besides that, we do have our main body and the main camera itself, which feels very, very familiar, especially to me who has been a Canon shooter for the most part. But right now we are shooting on the Panasonic Lumix S1 and then for the top-down camera we are shooting with the Sony FX3. So obviously we're not really shooting with Canon as much anymore since I did sell off my Canon EOS R5C, and obviously putting that money towards the new R5 Mark II. And here we have it, the Canon EOS R5 Mark II. First thing that I immediately noticed is a lot different is the new EVF. Now this EVF is taking from the Canon EOS R3, which means that it is an eye tracking EVF. So that way, if you're looking at different subjects in the field of view for your EVF, it'll actually track the thing with your eye, which is just really crazy of how that algorithm works, and it pretty much has cameras within the EVF. So really interesting how that technology works. We also do have a tally light in the front, so that way we can know if we're recording or not. We did have that same thing in the Canon EOS R5C, so it's nice that they're bringing it to their mirrorless line of cameras as well. And of course, one of the big new upgrades is that addition of full-size HDMI. It's going to be so nifty, especially for a lot of people who work with cables frequently and they want something that's sturdy, so that full-size HDMI is definitely going to come in handy. And also at the top we can tell that this does have time code, so that's actually kind of cool that we are taking it from the Canon EOS R5C and we're putting it within the R5 Mark II. Alright guys, so right now we're recording 4K RAW on the R5 Mark II. Now this is a completely new mode for both the R5 and also the R5C, so this is something that we are getting for the first time in the R5 Mark II. And yeah, just let me know how it looks with C-Log 2. The colors are going to be great, dynamic range is going to be great, and of course having 4K RAW built into the camera is going to be super useful, especially when you want to record RAW but you don't need 8K, so it's a really nice feature to come in handy. So yeah, let me know how the footage turns out. So when it comes to a vlog camera, I will say I definitely do prefer the Sony FX3 just because it's a lot lighter, it's a lot smaller, it's much more portable compared to the Canon EOS R5 Mark II. So the R5 Mark II is definitely going to be more of a production heavy camera for me, but again, I still love vlogging on the FX3, and who knows, maybe I might do some vlogs on the R5 Mark II, but I feel like for the most part, I'm probably going to stick to the Sony FX3. Alright, so recently I sold off my Canon EOS R5C and my main camera has been the Sony FX3, which is what we're shooting on right now. And because I have the Sony FX3, I've genuinely enjoyed the camera. I love the size, the form factor, and also just the overall dynamic range out of the FX3 I think looks really good. But of course, now that we do have our hands on the Canon R5 Mark II, and especially with the camera's addition of C-Log 2, I really want to test out the dynamic range between the FX3 and the R5 Mark II, seeing which camera seems to give us better results, and really overall just the dynamic range performance. Alright, so right now we're shooting on both the Canon R5 Mark II and the Sony FX3. So we do have C-Log 2, we are recording in 4K fine. But right now I mainly just want to see the autofocusing performance, dynamic range, overall exposure, just seeing how the image looks. And right now we're getting a little head-to-head comparison between the R5 Mark II and the FX3. And I will say, first impressions looking off of both the footage, I will say that the Canon R5 looks a lot more flat. It definitely gives off a much more neutral vlog look, whereas with the Sony FX3 it seems to be very vibrant. It seems to make the colors pop a lot more, so some people may enjoy that feature with the Sony FX3, but I feel like with the R5 Mark II, with the addition of C-Log, I feel like the image just looks a lot flatter and it just gives a much more pleasing image. So overall, just here testing out the dynamic range quality between both cameras, and later on we're going to do some more tests between the R5 Mark II and the Sony FX3, since both of them can do 1080p up to 240 frames per second. Technically the R5 Mark II can do 2K at 240 frames per second, so you're getting a little bit more resolution with the R5 Mark II in comparison to the Sony FX3. But again, both cameras are really great, whether you're a Sony shooter or a Canon shooter, both are going to be great. But personally for me, I love to enjoy both ecosystems. I think both of them have really good value for what you can do with it. So ultimately, big thumbs up on both the footage, but I definitely will say the R5 Mark II seems to look a lot more flat, a lot more neutral, and there just seems to be a lot more detail that I can utilize in both the exposure of the background and also the foreground. All right, so now we have the sun in the background, whereas we're in the foreground. So I still feel like the R5 Mark II picks up quite a bit more both in the sky and the foreground, whereas the Sony FX3 seems to be a little bit more blown out in the sky, but much better exposure on my face. So I'm kind of just curious to see how this works in terms of dynamic range quality, just seeing how well it can pick up the foreground and the background at the same time. And yeah, honestly, I've just been so much more used to the Canon image. Sony FX3 has been my main camera for the past few months, ever since I sold off the R5C, but still, just that Canon image, there's something about it that I'm just like still so much more used to it and getting the best possible image out of the camera. Whereas with the Sony FX3, I've definitely gotten a lot better with it and I still enjoy it, but there is a little bit of some leniency that I have towards Canon, that I'm just like very used to that color science and the way how it works. But again, the Sony FX3 still a beautiful camera. It's obviously super good for what it does, and especially when it comes to low light, the FX3 is definitely the clear winner in comparison to the R5 Mark II. But overall, just want to get some dynamic range thoughts and just seeing how the footage looks. Again, really excited that the R5 Mark II has C-Log 2. I feel like for us videographers, it is just like the nicest addition that they can possibly do with the camera. So very, very excited that they have C-Log 2 in the camera for us. And of course, the Sony FX3, I'm still going to be using this camera. It's still going to be one of my main cameras I'm going to be shooting with, especially for the upcoming future and just work that I do. So I still love the image out of this thing. I love the size, I love the form factor. It's just a really nice camera to work with. But again, just giving you guys another kind of comparison test just to see how it is. Even the autofocus performance, both seem to be extremely good. So Big thumbs up to both the FX3 and the R5 Mark II. Alrighty guys, so right now we're doing some overheating tests and some dynamic range tests with the Canon R5 Mark II, and so far we've been able to get over an hour and 30 minutes with 8K RAW. We do have an external battery that's plugged in, so that way we can extend the life, since right now we do have a 2TB CF Express Type B card in there, and of course the overheating hasn't fully kicked in just yet, so right now we're about like halfway through the overheating warning, but we still have a good amount left over. So pretty much if you guys are worried about overheating or the record times, like if you are planning to shoot a lot in 8K and you want that flexibility to record as much as possible, you're not really going to deal with many issues with the R5 Mark II, and it definitely has seemed to be fixed with the R5 Mark II when it comes to overheating. Yes, the camera still does overheat. There is a possibility of it overheating, but it's much less compared to what the initial Canon R5 was. We're going to do a lot more tests with both these cameras because literally next week I am traveling to India for one of my friend's sister's wedding, so I'm very excited for that, and I'm thinking to bring the R5 Mark II along, get some great photos, get some great videos, and really push the R5 Mark II to its limits of what it can capture and produce. So very excited for that. So honestly, the next time I see you guys with these cameras, we're going to be heading to India, so let's plan our trip. Alrighty guys, so we have finally made it to Jaipur, India, which is honestly my first time that I'm here, and so far I'm absolutely loving it. They call it the Pink City, and there's a lot of great scenery, there's a lot of great architecture, there's a bunch of palaces that are here based in Jaipur, so I'm very excited to check it all out. But I brought along the Canon EOS R5 Mark II with me to kind of take and get some photos, get some videos, really push the camera to its limits. And the main reason why we're here in Jaipur is that we're attending a wedding that's happening in a couple of days. So I thought it'd be the perfect time to really take out the R5 Mark II, get some good photos, get some good videos, and really just see how well we can push this camera. But so far, with the R5 Mark II, I am thoroughly enjoying it. The color science is really good. The fact that we're getting C-Log 2 is a really nice addition. And based off of Gerald Undunn's video on the dynamic range, so far the total stops to dynamic range is roughly around 14 to 15 stops. So we're not getting the full 16 stops as it was marketed in Canon's data, but around 14 to 15 stops is also really good, and it's even better compared to the R5C and the R5 Mark I. Now so far when it comes to battery life on the R5 Mark II, I find it to be a lot better compared to the R5C, mainly because we're not using the cinema operating system. Now with the R5C using the cinema operating system, it sucks up a lot more power and it just drains the battery way more compared to the photo operating system. And in terms of autofocus performance, you guys can see for yourself that it is very sticky, very fast. It does have dual pixel autofocus version 2, which is just really nice, and it's going to be a nice combination to pair it with the Canon C400, which we're going to be getting later this month or next month depending on when the camera is available. So I feel like the R5 Mark II is going to be the perfect B camera for the C400. Alrighty guys, so we are finally back from India and we have the Canon R5 Mark II with us. And honestly, Jaipur was just beautiful. It was so scenic. It was just luscious, just full of life. And as you guys got to see, we got a lot of great footage from the wedding. So let me know what you guys think about the footage down in the comments below. But overall, when it comes to my thoughts about the Canon R5 Mark II, is that it is easily one of the best hybrids and one of the most versatile cameras from Canon yet. So in terms of the pros with Canon R5 Mark II, the fact that you are getting no record limit is a huge one. Now technically, it does have a record limit up to 6 hours, but I will say most people, if you're shooting things like long-form podcasts or even documentary work, 6 hours is plenty enough. So technically it does have a record limit at 6 hours, but again, it's plenty enough for most people, and at least it's much better compared to having a 30-minute record limit. So that is definitely a huge feature that I absolutely love about the R5 Mark II. Another thing with the R5 Mark II is the addition of dual pixel autofocus version 2. The autofocus is so sticky, it's super fast, doesn't have a lot of breathing, which is really nice, and it's just something that's super versatile, especially when you're out on the field capturing things like sports or weddings, real estate, and just plenty of other scenarios where you're going to need some really fast autofocus. Next up is that you are getting a ton of versatile codecs within the camera itself. The fact that you're getting things like XF-AVC, XF-HEVC, you are getting raw capabilities to shoot up to 8K 60p and even 4K 60 in the SRAW mode. So it's really nice that you're getting so many different video codecs within the R5 Mark II. So especially if you are shooting, whether it's a CF Express Type B or a UHS2 card slot, the fact that you can have plenty of record options to choose from is really nice touch, and it's just going to make it much easier, especially when you're in the editing workstation. Next up is eye tracking EVF. Now, especially if you're a photographer, you're absolutely going to love this feature. It is taken from the Canon EOS R3, and pretty much whatever you see within your viewfinder is what it will move its focus point to. So especially for photographers out there that are shooting things like sports photography and you're trying to look at multiple different subjects in your field of view and you want to change the autofocus depending on who has the ball and pretty much what you want in focus, it's a really nice addition, and I think photographers are absolutely going to love it. It doesn't work in video mode, obviously, but again, for photographers, I think it's a really nice feature, and it just makes it a better hybrid overall. Now, in terms of the cons with the R5 Mark II, really the only con, in my view, is just that you have to upgrade all your batteries to the new LPE6P battery, since I really wouldn't recommend using the NH or just the LPE6N or the LPE6, the originals. So really, if you are going to be getting this camera, I would highly recommend to upgrade all of your batteries to the LPE6P, since that way you're going to be able to utilize all of the different record modes within the R5 Mark II. Now, another small one for me is the fact that we're only still getting one CF Express card slot. I would definitely have appreciated if they could have done a dual CF Express Type B. I just feel like it would make more sense, especially whether you're a video shooter or even a photographer. I feel like the CF Express Type B and the SD card is just kind of a weird combination, especially in a pro level body. So definitely, hopefully, if there is going to be a Mark III or future R5s, I would definitely love to see if we can get dual CF Express Type B, since I feel like most people are going to want to have a CF Express Type B card in their camera rather than SD-UHS-2. And my last little tidbit with the R5 Mark II is the entry price at $42.99. I feel like for the R5 Mark II, it's just a little too expensive for what I would recommend Canon to put it at. Honestly, I think it would have been best if Canon marked this camera at the same entry price as the R5 at $38.99. I think it's just a much better bargain, especially for what you're getting. $42.99 just feels a little bit too much, so definitely, especially for sales, whether it's Black Friday, Cyber Monday, or in the later future, whether you can find this camera used, I think you can get it for a much better price later on. So definitely, if you are interested in picking up the R5 Mark II, but maybe you're not in a dire need of an upgrade, then I definitely recommend to hold off and just wait for some time for the camera's price to go down, so that way it's just a much better buy later on. Now, I know some of you guys may be wondering if I am going to be keeping my R5 Mark II, and initially I was planning to consider keeping the R5 Mark II, since I feel like the R5 Mark II is the true R5 that a lot of us wanted back in 2020, but now it's finally refined. There's no record limit. You can actually shoot 8K. You can shoot up to 8K 60, have 4K 120, 1080p or 2K up to 240 frames per second. It's a beast in video. Of course, with photography, you're getting the same stuff from the R5 with that 45 megapixel sensor. So overall, it's a great camera. It's really good for what it can do. And initially I was planning to keep it, but today, as I'm filming this video, today is September 9th, and Canon just announced the new Canon EOS C80, which honestly might just be the perfect cinema camera that you can buy right now for the money. In terms of that price to performance for what you're getting for the Canon C80, it just feels really nice, and I'm planning to return my R5 Mark II to get the C80, since again, for me, I'm primarily a cinematographer. I'm not too much of a photographer, so definitely for hybrid shooters, you're going to want to get your hands on the R5 Mark II, but if you're someone like me who's more of a cinematographer and still kind of comes second later in your life, then the Canon C80 might just be the perfect camera, and I'm definitely going to be getting my hands on the camera for review and also planning to keep it as well. And also, as I mentioned earlier in this video, we will be getting a new cinema camera very soon, which is going to be the Canon EOS C400, which is going to be like my true cinema camera that I'm paying with my own money. It is something that I have dreamed of, to have my own professional cinema camera, and given what the C400 has within the camera, I'm very excited. So personally, I think the Canon C400 and the Canon C80 is just going to be a great pair, and I'm going to love to use both those cameras later on. But again, I'm going to be kind of sad that I am letting go of the R5 Mark II. I feel like it's a really nice camera. It just gives you all of the upgrades that you wanted from the initial R5, and it kind of gives you some nice features from the R5C, like that tally light and also just the air ventilation within the camera itself. But overall, for me, I am a cinematographer at heart, so I am going to go for the cinema cameras than the hybrid cameras. But especially for those in a dire need of an upgrade, the R5 Mark II is a phenomenal camera. There's really not many flaws with this camera that it has. I mean, again, the fact that you're getting C-Log 2, you're getting all of these different features, it's so nice that we get to finally see this within a hybrid mirrorless camera, and I'm very excited to see what Canon has in the future for the 5 series. So that's going to do it for us on this video. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on the next video. Peace.